This season of Wait For It is brought to you by Big Fig Mattress. So I have a king-size Big Fig because I love to feel luxurious when I sleep, but also when I'm just hanging out, watching television, scrolling my phone, or when I have company over. This mattress is ready to be supportive. Whether you describe yourself as fat, fluffy, plus-sized, or even big-boned, this mattress is going to hold you up. I was apprehensive to get one at first, but Big Fig offers a 120-night trial just to make sure it's the right mattress for you. And trust me, it won't take you that long to decide that this mattress is the one. Go to the link in our show notes and take the Bed Builder quiz to get exclusive discounts on your new Big Fig. What's up, everybody? It's me, Ronald Young Jr., with a quick note and a request. I want to let you know that Radiotopia's annual fundraiser is happening right now. That's right, it's the time of year where we come to you and ask for your help in keeping this network running. If Wait For It has meant something to you, whether you're a day one listener or a more recent fan, I hope you'll consider donating today at radiotopia.fm/donate. And if you donate, we'll send you a curated playlist from all the Radiotopia producers as a token of our thanks. That's radiotopia.fm/donate. Thank you so much. What's up, everybody? It's me, Ronald Young Jr., and we are hard at work on the remaining 2 episodes of Wait For It Season 2, which we'll be releasing after Thanksgiving starting December 5th. But in the meantime, I wanted to share an episode of another podcast called Never Post. It's a podcast for and about the internet. They ask questions about why the internet and the world, because of the internet, is the way it is. Each episode starts with the news of the week, followed by 2 stories about things you didn't know you wanted to know about the internet. Never Post is independent media, just like Wait For It, which means they're trying to make a living off of what they create. And let me tell you, for podcasting right now, it's challenging. In one of their most recent episodes, they invited me on the show, along with 2 of my colleagues, who you'll hear from shortly, to talk about how independent podcasting can work. Does it work? Can it be better? We talk about it all. If you like this conversation, you can subscribe and follow Never Post everywhere you listen. So stay tuned for that episode right after the break. And again, we'll be back with new episodes of Wait For It after the Thanksgiving break. As always, thanks for listening. This season of Wait For It is brought to you by Big Fig Mattress. I've been sleeping on a Big Fig for nearly 2 years now, and let me tell you, this mattress is fantastic. As a bigger guy, I've had problems in the past with mattresses that sag over time, but that's not an issue I've had with Big Fig. From the first time I laid on it, I could tell the difference in support. It held me up without being uncomfortable or hard. It has an extra firm mattress edge that gives a bit of a larger sleep surface. It also has something called thermogel cooling technology that, as a person who is almost always running hot, keeps me nice and cool while I sleep. But also, Big Fig is now more than a mattress company. I recently got a hold of their sheets, pillows, and my personal favorite, a big old fluffy adjustable body pillow. Yes, I said adjustable. You can remove some fluff and make it as soft and squishy as you would like. All of these items are now available on the Big Fig website, and you can bundle multiple items and get discounts as you redo your entire sleep system. Go to the link in our show notes and take the Bed Builder quiz to get exclusive discounts on your new Big Fig.
Folks, hello, and welcome to Never Post, a show for and about the internet. I am Hans Buetow, and I am the senior producer for the show. We have got something really special for you today. It's a bit different from what we normally do. But if you have been listening to Never Post since the beginning, you are going to recognize the format of this episode. If you have not been listening since the beginning, first of all, welcome. Glad to have you. And second of all, if you go back to our episode 0, the first thing we publish, you will see a roundtable conversation with some very smart media people discussing what it is like to try to be independent in this here media landscape in which we find ourselves. We found that conversation really valuable, and we heard from a lot of you that you also found it useful. So we'd like to do it again. More of that, please. And today, we're going to do just that. But instead of talking about independent media, we are going to do a deep dive into one very specific type of media. This medium, podcasting, to see how it's doing. We want to have an open conversation with some very smart people about this thing we are embroiled in, and that we assume you, since you are listening to a podcast right now to hear this, we assume you are also interested in this. But first, if you have not been breathlessly following the nuances of the trajectory of podcasting for the past 15 years, let's cover a little bit of history to contextualize. Starting in and around 2014, podcasting saw a meteoric growth for a medium. This growth was driven by listeners discovering the medium. Then it was followed by creators who wanted to talk to those listeners, and then by advertisers who wanted to support those creators talking to those listeners. Podcast companies were formed and grew very quickly. Jobs were created, shows were built. A lot of things flourished as cash was easy, ROI was pretty murky, and everything looked kind of possible. This growth reached a high watermark during the pandemic, and then it started to slow. In the past 4 years, the ad market has continued to grow, but contracted in scope as advertisers got spooked by uncertain economic headwinds, and they pulled ad budgets for all but the biggest, the most reliable investments in their eyes. And as a part of that contraction, some big companies realized that their big investments, to the tune of tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, one show in particular in the billions with a B, those investments in specific podcasts were never going to return what those companies wanted. So, those companies did what all big tech and media companies do. They laid people off, they shuttered divisions, and they divested from the future of the medium. What some observers saw in this was a commentary on the future of podcasting. But that's not what I think it actually is. A reflection of big players realizing their past decisions were way too expensive. This led others feeling spooked about the future, and the layoffs and the contractions that started with the big players kind of moved throughout the industry. Now, this is the end game of something we have been seeing in other digital media over the last, decade and a half? Massive players consolidating a bunch of the industry, realizing that it is unsustainable, and then just letting it die. Huge buyouts, rounds and rounds of layoffs, platform pivots, contraction. Which brings us to today. Bigger overall audiences, smaller individual show audiences, fractured connections, massive industry valuation, but no funding to be seen by the vast majority of podcasters. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about all of that after this quick break. Joining us are Lauren Passell, author of Podcast the Newsletter, and founder of Tink Media, which is a PR and marketing firm that specializes in podcasts and which, very full disclosure, Neverpost employed the services of through July of 2024. Hello, Lauren.
Hi.
We've got Mia Lobel here, audio producer, former head of content at Pushkin Industries, where she oversaw revisionist history, broken record, and much, much more. Mia is also the author of the newsletter Freelance Cafe and is an adjunct professor at the Newmark J School. Mia, hello.
Hello.
And very excited to have Ronald Young Jr. with us. Ronald is an audio producer and podcast host, as well as the creator of the multi-award-winning podcast Wait For It. Ronald has also hosted Leaving the Theater and is the current host of Pop Culture Debate Club from Lemonada and BBC. Ronald, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
We are so excited to have all three of you here to talk about and dig deep into the state of the podcasting industry. So mostly in this conversation, I think we are interested in how one builds a business, podcasting specifically, and if you even can right now. Could one even do that? And that to me is what is implied by this word industry, right? So a distinct economic sector producing its own goods, made up by relationships between many businesses and other commercial entities. So what does that look like for podcasting right now? And we'd love to do kind of a health check and a really honest conversation about what's happening in podcasts, because it has been a ride the last 4 years, the last 10 years, the last 15 years, and we're in a very specific place. And so we'd like to kind of check in with all of you about that. And to start that, I want to do kind of a rapid fire question around to everybody just to get us kicked off. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being anyone can do it tomorrow with minimal effort, no problem, and 10 being nearly impossible for anyone and everyone, how difficult is it for someone with no pre-existing audience to build one large enough to make a living by podcasting? Mia, I'd love to hear from you first. Answer 1 to 10, how tough to build that audience?
I mean, I have so many qualifying questions. I'm not good at this 1 to 10 thing because do they have good storytelling chops? Are they super passionate and really want to do this and only this and nothing else? Are they willing to put in the time to do both the creation of the show and the marketing of the show? I mean, so I guess with all of that, I'll give it a 5 because that's 5. A total cop out. I don't know.
Okay. I was hearing a 7 in that, but 5. Let's do 5. Great. Ronald, what about you?
Like a 7 or an 8.
Okay. And Lauren?
I'm 3. Overly optimistic, perhaps, but I think can be done.
3, 5, and 7 is the perfect range, I think, to have this conversation about where we are right now and what we're doing. And I kind of asked this to get started because last week, the former host of Reply All, current host of the podcast Hyperfix, Alex Goldman, tweeted that he was running the numbers and estimates that for him to make a living, to pay his team a living wage and pay for all of the things that a media company and its employees need to just, survive, not get rich, but survive, he needs 200,000 people to listen to each episode of the show. So we have done on Neverpost similar calculations and we have gotten basically the same number. So just real quick, what are the most common ways that people make money from podcasting? Ronald, I'm going to go to you first. How do we get the money in the door?
I mean, typically it's through advertising, but I can tell you, personally, for me, most of the money that I've made from podcasting has been on producing other people's podcasts, which is an internal way to fund the projects that I actually want to do. But in making a podcast, in even making Wait For It, we hadn't sold ads for the first season of the podcast. I think we sold 1 ad by the time we got through the first season of the podcast. And that's with having a Tribeca Award, a write-up in the New York Times, and 3 Podcast Academy Awards. And we sold 1 ad. So it wasn't until season 2 that we really got a partnership that really brought some money in the door. And that really just paid for the production of season 2. It really didn't give us much more than that. If we start to calculate what it actually takes for me as to be the senior producer, showrunner, host, and writer of the podcast, and I've never been paid for this show, then I would probably say that the numbers that the Goldman number is probably accurate. But I've never depended on one show to be the thing that's going to make the living. I've always stepped into different bags. And I feel like my pushback to most of that is always be why do you keep trying to make one show to pay all your bills? That's winning the lottery. You know what I mean? Even actors are doing that. You know what I mean? Everyone's doing multiple things. So when someone says something like that, it's almost like they're saying hey, everybody listen to this show so I can make a bag of money and pay rent. And I'm well, most of us are hustling to pay rent, which is kind of the reality of working in audio production.
Hustling to pay rent is I think going to be such a theme for this coming forward. So I really want to come back to that. So it sounds like that you're talking about advertising, you're talking about doing work for hire for other folks and some partnerships. But Lauren, you see a lot of podcasts in the work that you do. What are some of the other ways that money comes in for folks?
Well, I think when people come to me, they assume that they're going to have to traditionally advertise on the CPM model.
Yeah. Which is cost per thousand. So if you have 200,000 people listening, that's going to be a couple $1,000s per episode. And it's of course dependent on how many you produce and how many avails you have and all of the things that are in the middle.
Yeah. And I just think there's so many other ways to monetize. And I think the CPM model isn't going to work for almost everyone. And so these are creative people I'm talking to who are good at engaging audiences and creating intimate relationships with these people. I think that the more creative they can get about like audience supported membership platforms, I'm also always pushing people towards exploring someone to sponsor a season or even a mini series, because I think that some podcasters, especially some of the very small independent ones I'm working with, they don't know that they can go to a brand and ask for $10,000 or something. And I know that it's not going to work every single time, but I think there's the CPM advertising that most people come in wanting to talk to me about, and I am just excited to push them away into other options.
Mia, you have worked at some big organizations with more revenue probably flowing through than anything we've talked about right now. Like, is there anything that we missed from the revenue perspective that you feel like is an actual viable way for shows to bring in money?
No, I think Ronald and Lauren nailed it. One thing I'll add to the conversation though is grants, and that is that is paying for the show that I am working on right now. It's called Face Off, the U.S. versus China, and it's a foreign policy podcast. It is not meant to be sort of widely popular. We're going for a very targeted audience, and we got a grant from Carnegie to make this show, and we've gotten a grant for 2 seasons now. So grant writing is a full-time job in and of itself. So most producers I know don't have time to do that and also make their show, but it's a wonderful limited return on investment way of getting a show made.
I think that makes the full round of revenue sources that seem the most reliable, with the exception of like maybe a couple of outliers that I wonder if even still exist anymore. Things like merch, things like live shows, things like the dreaded IP sales, which actually feels like one of the first and biggest casualties of the last couple of years, where that doesn't seem like a viable thing. And it's definitely completely infused with luck to be able to get that sort of thing. And so when we look at like how Ronald presented this as like whole first season of Wait For It, you know, got one ad. Lauren saying you'd be surprised by who can come forward to pay and get sponsorship. That 200,000 number, how does that feel about right to everybody to make a sustainable living for 3 to 4 people making a show? Is 200,000 about right?
I don't think his math is wrong, right? Like, I read that tweet very carefully, and I'm so glad that he was so transparent about his thinking and his numbers. More of that. That's amazing. I just think the 200,000 per episode number is unattainable for the majority of podcasters. That is a huge number.
Yeah.
And most podcast audiences are niche and smaller than that, including shows at big podcast companies. Yes, there are the shows that like go up there and get like revisionist style numbers and serial style numbers and Smartless and those big shows, right? But the majority, and there are charts to show this, the majority of shows get a whole lot less than that. One of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I've been working very closely with Kristen Hayford, who's this amazing marketer, former LAist, now independent person, is raising the value of each individual listener. And so retraining buyers, sponsors, advertisers of all kinds, that the audiences that you are getting through a podcast are worth more than your average click, right? And so you're going to need fewer downloads to get an equivalent amount of money. Basically, a much smaller podcast could indeed be viable. Because I just don't, people can't get 200. I think Alex is incredibly smart and amazing as a producer. I hate to say it, I'm very skeptical that he's going to reach that goal.
I'm glad you said that, because the 200,000 an episode seems tied to the math, kind of in the way that I think the CPM model is. And that doesn't leave all this space for other things, including an anonymous donor who can give funding. I mean, where are they? I don't know, but that is...
They're anonymous. Yeah. I mean, it's in the definition. We don't know where they are.
I'm on pins and needles. Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. I'm interested in what Ronald thinks about that, because like that feels hard to build a business plan off of, just like IP felt hard to build a business, selling your IP felt hard to build a business plan. And, you know, Ronald, when you entered into this space and world, how did you experience the idea of scale as we've been talking about it with revenue?
You know, it's funny. It's like, I guess, and you've kind of caught me in a place where I've like kind of soured on podcasting as an industry a lot. So it feels like a lot, and probably because I was late to the party and I got accolades that if I would have gotten them in 2012, I'd have like $1 million right now. But like because I got them in 2023, like it really, like everything had changed. The money had contracted, the market was gone. Like everything was like a lot different now than it was in the time before. So I feel like we really do have to hustle for every dime we have. And luckily, like I was already used to doing that. Like I was already used to like having more than one job and like working to pay most of the bills in that case. So I feel like now when I think about like what most of the revenue models look like, the reason why I don't feel as optimistic is because like even in the stuff that like feels the most promising, you still in some cases have to get lucky, because I've never had an anonymous donor come and I've heard of several people who have had like anonymous donors like, here's $1 million. And I'm just like, yo, man, people are out here like busting their asses, and like getting an anonymous donation would be incredible. But the reality of it is, if you can get like 10 really excited patrons, then, you know, maybe you could pay for the hosting fees for your podcast. If you stay committed, you hope to like double that again and again over time. So it feels tough.
It breaks my heart. You are absolutely right about what you're saying, that if you had gotten all of those accolades and all of the attention that you have justifiably gotten over the last couple of years, 3 years earlier, it would be a wholly different universe. And it kills me a little bit.
I'd be on a beach.
That's right. And I am so curious.
Sand in your microphone.
Have all those accolades jostled your numbers at all?
Yeah, it did. I'm going to tell you my biggest spikes. I got a spike when we won the Podcast Academy Awards. We got a spike when they talked about us in the New York Times. But do you want to know when we got our biggest spike? When I guest appeared on Normal Gossip.
Yeah,
that was the biggest bumps we've seen. And it was why, like the numbers that we got off of, and shout out to Normal Gossip, Alex and Kelsey, like shout out to them. That show is doing numbers that really created buzz. And to be honest with you, the most significant spikes I've ever seen has never been from an accolade. It's always been from an appearance or from something like that. I'm sorry, that was a long-winded answer to your question. But yes, they have jostled the numbers.
I also just think there's a time thing here that we need to account for, because Alex said 18 months
to get to 200,000.
Yeah. And I would like to account that into my answer, whether it's possible or not, because I also think 18 months, no, but like, and actually this reminds me, Hans, I got an email from Hans saying, hi, I'm Hans, and I'm interested in working with Tink. And I was like, Hans? Oh my God. Because I was listening to your name on credits when I was a baby podcast listener. So that was very exciting for me. And you came and asked about numbers. And I feel like I left that call and I was like, Hans is never going to call me again, because I just depressed him when I told him about, because you came with this plan and I was like, I was like, yikes, I'm not sure if that's possible. And I never thought I'd talk to you ever again. Can you tell me how you felt after that call? What the conversation was after you had that call with me, where I kind of said, your plan is not possible. And I'm the one that's saying I'm optimistic. And I was like, it's not possible. And how is it lining up with what you came to me with the plan that you came to me? Because you had a plan kind of similar to Alex's.
We had a plan completely similar to Alex, because I'm coming from a place where I hadn't meaningfully launched a show since 2017. And so when you launch a show with somebody notable in 2017, there's a certain level of immediate success you just expect. And that was the benchmark. And then I went and I worked at, the New York Times, which is like, you have zero perspective after that on what an appropriately sized show is. And so I came in thinking, okay, let's be conservative about this. And I built models and numbers based on my 2017 experience of the world. And you came in and said, ha! And you were right. Buzzsprout says that to be in the top 1% of podcasts, you get just over 5,000 listens within the first 7 days, puts you in the top 1% of podcasts.
That's including podcasts that had one episode 8 years ago, correct?
That's a good question of what goes into that data. Hey there, Hans from the future editing Hans cutting this up, Hans, breaking in here to give you just a little bit of context to these numbers that I didn't give during the recording. So these numbers are from 2022 from the popular podcast host Buzzsprout, and they represent listenership across Buzzsprout's catalog of podcasts. These numbers are cited often for their measurement of listens, since they are one of the few places that are able or trying to measure it. It's really tough to know across the industry what the numbers are. So we are using this individual slice of data as a proxy for all podcasting. Now, the overall numbers for the industry will be larger, but you can expect the ratios probably to stay about the same. It's not perfect, but it's what we have. Okay, back to it. And this is like the top of the podcasting. And so to say we can't become sustainable until we hit 200,000.
Yeah.
But 1% of people are lucky to get to 5,000. Like, this, I think, for me, brings up this question of when we talk about digital media, like YouTube, influencers, podcasting included in that, there's still a lot of talk about how anyone can make it doing them. Like we hear and probably bandy around the word democratized more often than we think if we were to actually calculate it. You just need an idea and a microphone, and people out there are ready and waiting to listen. And like, that might be true, but with that gap between 5,000 and 200,000, the implication that you'll make any money seems like increasingly remote and maybe just wrong. And like, I don't know. I want to throw to Mia. Like, what do you think about that gap? Because you've worked on both sides of that, of the like 5,000 and the 200,000s.
Yes. I mean, at Pushkin, we had these tentpole shows that came up in 2019 and earlier, right? That like did amazingly well. And then anything that we tried to launch after that did less well. And it's not because the shows were less good. It's because the market had just become more saturated. I mean, we put incredible talent behind the mic that just did not get the kind of numbers that we had seen prior to that. And that is just because there's so much more to listen to, and people can be much more choosy about what they want to hear. And if there's only so many shows that like any one person can listen to. Like, that all makes good logical sense. That said, I would never discourage anyone from making a podcast if they really want to make a podcast. And Normal Gossip is a perfect example of that. Like, Alex is a super talented creator and had this amazing idea and got it done and found an audience. And they did it independently, which is my favorite part. And like
Key.
Yeah.
that, I still think having a small, loyal audience for something that you care passionately about is worth it, depending on what sustainability means for you in terms of making a living, right? Like, if you are fine doing what Ronald's doing and still making other people's shows and scrapping your money together, doing consulting, doing teaching, whatever it is you're doing, and also you get to make your show in your way independently, and you're enjoying the process, great. If you get 200,000 downloads an episode, amazing. But if you don't, it's not considered a failure, right? And do what you have to do in order to make your life sustainable. The economy of it has changed. And I don't think that's good or bad. It is just what happens when a lot of people get into it. It's not about changing the industry. It's about creating space in the industry for independents to support each other collectively so that you can have a smaller audience and still make it sustainable. That is the thing that I think about day in and day out. I don't have any solutions as of yet, but I do believe that is possible. And there's enough talent out there who really know how to do this and don't work for one of the big podcast companies that I believe this can happen somehow, some way, sometime.
I feel like I agree. The majority of what you're saying, Mia, I agree with. I think, but I want to like highlight one thing, which is that I truly think when I think about like just popular podcasts over time that have been popular in the last few years, Two that stand out to me, of course, Normal Gossip, we already talked about, and then also Maintenance Phase, which is another podcast that was started independently, kind of on the backs of a writer, Michael Hobbs, and Aubrey Gordon, what she's doing, like in terms of like fat activism, the fat communities. Like it was something that was independent. And I feel like just the idea now, what I'm thinking is there's a lot of executives out there and decision makers, people who I've talked to, who I've interfaced with, who I've pitched to, who have made offers, all of that. I've been in relationships with those people, and I still get the sense that they don't get what audiences actually want to listen to, like what they actually want in front of them. And that's evidenced by what you see rise to the top. Like, of course, there are celebrity podcasts that make it. Like you'll get like a Kelsey Brothers New Heights. You'll get that just jumps to the top for a litany of different reasons. But when they try to repeat that specific formula, they find that it's not just about celebrities and a microphone. It's not just about that. There's something else going on there because, again, I'll keep saying Normal Gossip all out this whole hour, which is that like Normal Gossip comes along and there's no celebrities. They're literally telling us stories about people we've never heard of. And we're just like, whoa, this is revolutionary. You know what I mean? So I feel like there's something about like who gets to be the expert in deciding what shows get made that I think is 100% broken. And I think that's what's kind of like screwing a lot of us right now.
I think there's a lot more power in this cycle of who promotes who, because the story you're telling about Normal Gossip is the same story that Normal Gossip could tell about whoever featured them. Somebody who got featured on 99% Invisible gets the 99 PI jump. 99% Invisible, they are where they are because they got the TAL jump. TAL got where they are because they got the NPR jump. Like everybody of real consequential size, for the most part, broadly speaking, has that story of someone anointed me. Someone brought me on and told people where to find him, and their legions followed me. But I want to pick up a thread that I'm hearing between Mia and Ronald here about people playing with each other, people being in collaboration. And I want to hit Lauren with this. I feel like there used to be a tenor. I grew up in the tenor, the public radio tenor, where it was a rising tide raises all boats. If we can just get listeners to listen to podcasts, they will listen to everyone's podcasts. And so like, let's all join hands and let's go to Third Coast and let's have fun. Third Coast International Audio Festival, which is held in Chicago every year. It's a creators event, all about craft, and we get to celebrate that. I don't feel that kinship anymore in the industry. But Lauren, am I wrong? Have we moved to like, hey, that's my podcast listener. That person only has 5 podcasts and you're taking one of the slots, but I want it? Or are we still playing nice? Are we doing what Mia's talking about? Are we able to do what Mia's talking about, which is to come together and work and play with each other?
I talk about promo swaps all the time when I talk at conferences. And one time this guy stood up and said, why would I send someone else to another podcast? And I said, sir, I think you're in the wrong business because that's not what we do here. And what you're talking about is what I would say 80% of my business is working with other podcasters. It's the only thing I believe in, actually. I tell people you can buy an ad, you can get a spike from being on something, you can get featured on Apple Podcasts and get a spike and then go right back down. But the organic traffic, but the thing is it takes a lot of time. But it's the one thing I tell people with certainty. I say so little with like tons of asterisks, but I believe with certainty, borrowing audience is what works. It just takes time. And the other thing I think that works is getting a personal recommendation from a friend. I think we need to all get better about that. I believe that very strongly that does work, but I think it really takes a lot of time. And the thing is, the shows that are probably at the top of the charts, they're not really generally playing with other shows. That's the unfortunate part.
That's interesting. So like they're not really doing. Yeah, not anymore. They're like they sometimes will anoint other people, but they're not really in true collaboration. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. I mean, even like ones that I really love.
Yeah.
I think because this is my business to think that way in every single moment of my day. I'm thinking, how can I cross promote? And I know who to go to and who never to go to.
Why did that change? I mean, that feels like a change. Why did that change?
I mean, one example is NPR One, right? Like NPR One used to put outside shows on their network, right? It was basically like an extra radio station that would, play a bunch of NPR podcasts, and then they would drop in some independent or outside podcasts. And they ultimately decided to stop doing that, I think, because they were like, well, why are we helping somebody else? Right. And
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. I think that's wrong thinking. I mean, that's corporate thinking.
Yeah.
And if you can think more collectively, then you realize that, like, actually by doing that, you are helping the whole industry. But maybe I'm just like naive and whatever. I don't know. Tell me, Ronald.
I don't think you're wrong. I think when Hans asked the question, the first thing that jumped in my mind was speculation. And so this could just be conspiracy theory when I'm thinking. But what I think happened was, think about when promo swaps were the most prevalent, right? Like, we're thinking like 2012 up through 2014, you got Serial. So right around there, 2014 through 16. So, and then think about when promo swapping probably became like a little bit more sparse. If it is, and this is all speculation, if it is between 2016 and 2020, then it makes sense that when we had the influx of the greatest amount of cash into podcasting and corporate suits and folks that are in there, there's going to be people that are like, well, you can't swap that. That's too valuable. Like, what are we getting in return? And they're examining something that isn't just about like the scrappy upstarts going together and the rising tide lifts all boats, but there's probably promo swaps that did not happen that could have potentially killed a great show simply because they were like, well, what's in it for us? That collaboration isn't there anymore. Yeah, I'm not. Well, it's not gone completely, Lauren. I know I'm trying to stay positive, but it's not gone completely. But it's certainly not what it was.
It still exists among independents. I am certain of that. It does not exist at the corporate level. I'll agree with you there.
And also, I just want to say, it's like the promo swaps, I think people are generally going number for number. I have found when we're doing 30-second promo swaps, people want to go number for number or whatever. I have been able to creatively do a feed swap where I'm sending an entire episode to another show. If I do the work ahead of time, I do all the planning, I put my producer hat on, and I go out to a show much bigger, and I think, okay, are you going on vacation this day? I found this, if I have been able to do that. So I find more freedom when I am actually doing a feed swap because it's a great piece of content, and I can maybe solve a podcaster's problem by giving them an episode or something like that. It takes a lot of work. And doesn't happen every time. The promo swaps, though, I find people going number for number.
I mean, it also makes me think of these networks that have gotten so big that they only ever promote other shows in their network. And why would they consider supporting a show that doesn't benefit them in some direct way? And I think that's, it makes me sad. I do understand that from a business perspective of why would you do that? And before they were so big, they had to do that because they needed the favor, right? When like companies are starting up, they of course have to like lean on the audiences of other networks. But once you get, enough shows that you can just sort of like support each other, then of course you want to keep people in your network because your advertisers are counting on that. And I just think that's wrong thinking overall.
Doesn't this all go back to the CPM model? Because a lot of those shows are on the CPM model, and they are screwed if they don't hit their numbers on this CPM model that is broken. So then they don't care about all ships rising suddenly. So
is anyone making it off of the CPM, the cost per thousand, which is advertising model where your money comes in because you sell ads against it? Is anyone making money off that?
I think some of the big Pushkin shows are. I mean, I could be wrong. I've been gone from there for 2 years now, but they were bringing in big advertising dollars. Although maybe it was back in the day. Maybe they're not anymore. I don't know.
I don't know, because I'm very curious to see, like, nowadays advertisers are getting a lot more savvy about what they're actually buying in terms of like those CPM numbers, and they want to actually see a return on them. And I feel like 2 years, if you go back to 2 years ago and even before that with like Pushkin or any other company, like they were living in a time when you could just say anything to an advertiser and they'd be like, yeah, whatever, here's $1 million. You'd be like, yeah, we're going to get you 1 million downloads. And that wasn't always the case. Whereas now, especially as the money began to contract, you see that people are a little bit more stingy with their line items.
There are some really big shows, though, like shows that can really deliver millions of listeners. And that has to be valuable for an advertiser.
This is where I'm really interested because Ronald talked about it contracting. But what I think is super interesting about this is it's contracting for a certain echelon of people.
Yes.
that like the industry is supposedly worth over $20 billion, which like in terms of video games, music,
I ain't
like,
seen none of that.
It's not, we haven't seen any of it, right? Like, and it generates over $2 billion in ad revenue, right? But like exactly like Ronald said, acclaimed show sold one ad, can't make, if 5,000 downloads is the top 1% of podcasts, but 10,000 downloads is really where you start being able to sell ads. That's $2 billion going to less than 1% of the people who make shows.
And unfortunately, making a beautiful show like what Ronald made you don't get rewarded with that money. And you almost get penalized by taking the time to that excellent production and beautiful storytelling and having a limited series. Oh my goodness, a limited series. That's just not what people are getting rewarded for.
Where my head goes after that is places like Radiotopia, right? Where you bring together kind of the best of the best and you sell across the whole network instead of relying on one individual show to carry them all. Kind of like 99.pi did back in the day. And you allow all of the creators to kind of band together in this collective way to sell across the network and achieve the kind of numbers that advertisers want to see. But my understanding is that it doesn't actually work. And I would love to know why.
Yeah. This all makes me really ask the question, if the balances that we have outlined are so off in terms of how to make this workable. The premise that we started this whole thing with was this idea of like an industry, right? So like distinct economic sector, producing its own goods, made up by relationships between many businesses and other commercial entities. Is podcasting actually an industry?
Oof, what a question.
I mean, I don't know. It's such a meta question, but the creators matter, right?
Yes.
Like it's about talent. It's about creative people expressing themselves through a medium. Is that an industry? I mean, I don't know. I don't, it should be like you should be able to support creators in this economy. And again, I'm sort of, I feel so like I just say this stuff and it feels so, it seems so naive, but I really believe it. It's like supporting the arts. Right? You are supporting talented people who have a vision and have skill at executing that vision in whatever format it is. There is so much talent in this industry and they should be, I said it. I said the word industry.
You said it. I raised my finger and I pointed, right? Like
also,
right?
It's an old industry, right? Podcasting is not new. Podcasting is just an extension of public radio, which has been around for a very long time. This is not new. It is just a different distribution model. It's digital distribution instead of broadcast distribution. And another thing that drives me bonkers is that radio stations can't figure out how to monetize podcasts when it's exactly the same thing that they've been selling for decades. What is the difference?
I think it's captive audience. I think that's what it is. Because I think like at one point, like if you think about listening to the radio, like we really didn't have a choice as to what we were listening to. And so like you would get into the car and it'd be like whatever radio station was on, you were going to listen through to the ads. Sometimes you switch between radio station until you realize that they were all playing ads at the same time. So it really didn't even matter. So you just picked your favorite. Whereas now it just feels like the fact that people have so many like avenues of entertainment to choose from that it feels like because there's still people trying to get maximum money out of all of those avenues for whatever, like the people who end up getting squeezed is us, the creators. Like we're the ones who end up getting squeezed because we're the ones getting smaller checks. We're the ones who have to work longer and do multiple jobs in order to make what we would have made if we had just like had a hit morning show in the 90s. You know what I mean? Like, but that doesn't really happen anymore. So I think when people try to think of it as an extension of radio, I think what they forget, like the one thing that we forget is like you had a captive audience and there was much more of a monoculture in those days. And it's so fractured now that it's like, it's hard to figure out it's hard for them to figure out how to monetize us, which it makes it harder for us, to be honest.
And it's hard for us to figure out what the value of a listener is because that's back to the CPM problem. I'm going to stop talking about that.
But it's also hard for listeners to find stuff that to find new stuff that they're going to love, right? Like this gets to the issue of discovery, right? And so, another thing I've been thinking about is the idea of trust. This is what Lauren said earlier about like needing to have sort of that friend who taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, you should listen to this show. This is so good. I love this. Right. So that idea. And the thing with a radio show or a radio station is that like you keep going back to the same station because you love it for whatever reason, right? Either there's a host that you love or it's relevant to your geographic area or you feel nostalgic for it for whatever reason, but you trust that they're going to give you stuff that you like. And that has kind of, with on demand, that's kind of like gone out the window. Like you can trust an algorithm, maybe, but I'm interested in going like somehow bringing back this idea of a recommendation engine that actually works to recommend an array of things based on the type of person you are. Right. So like, I am not going to listen to the New York Times app because I don't want to listen to New York Times day in and day out. I like more variety in what I am listening to. I like a lot of different stuff. So I'm going to listen to the stuff that's already in my player. And then if somebody tells me that I should listen to some episode of something, I'm going to check that out too. But I need like a more singular place to go to hear stuff that I am pretty convinced I'm going to enjoy.
Are you talking about Podcast the Newsletter?
I mean, of course.
It's very hard to convert a non-listener to a listener, so I don't even try. Like, Ronald, I'm curious about your award-winning show that was so beautiful, perfect. Even your show, could you get non-listeners to listen to it? Because I have a hard time getting non-listeners to listen, so I think that's another problem. I did this thing in last April. I called it Adopt a Listener Month, and I tried to get people to adopt one listener because I was like, we just need to crack those people.
And by adopt, you mean, hey, let me hold your hand and show you how to download.
Have them join their families. They're now paying for their school and education.
The classic.
Actually find a show for them and get them hooked. I was like, yes, this is what we need. This is what we do. So a bunch of me and Ariel Nissenblatt and a bunch of people got in Washington Square Park one day, signs, sidewalk chalk. I was like, this is going to be amazing. We're going to stop people in the street and say, what do you like? I'm going to find that perfect show for you. You're from Ohio? There's a show about Buckeyes. Did you know that? Oh my gosh. Let's just say the people we talked to taught me more than I taught them. They didn't know how to download one. Yeah. They only listened on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. They watched things on YouTube that were not podcasts and thought they were podcasts. I was not giving them niche recommendations. I was like, please listen to a podcast. I was recommending Joe Rogan to people that were only listening to Jordan Peterson. Okay. Yeah. So this is like a side problem, but it's a big problem.
We talk about converting non-listeners, but there is a bunch of listeners, because if you think about podcasting, it is kind of fractured into two schools, which is like the public radio school and then the everybody else school, I would say.
Commercial. Because the commercial school. It's commercial and public radio. Yeah.
It's bigger.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm saying. They're bigger, but there's a lot of commercial listeners who would love the stuff that's made by the public radio folks and vice versa. And I feel like I don't see enough like cross-pollination between those two audiences, i.e. like someone who likes Joe Rogan and also regularly listens to Radiolab. You know what I mean? Where there's probably something there for both of those audiences, but I don't see them intersect enough.
I think there's something I want to introduce here, which was said to me by someone. If you are listening and you are that someone, please let me know, because I would love to attribute it to you, but I don't remember who you are. So I'm going to pretend like I thought of it. But I actually think we need to go farther. Recommendation has a feeling of hoping and like we haven't quite gotten to the level where we trust ourselves yet. I think we actually need criticism. We have no one in this industry who will criticize another person's work. We do it in private a little bit, but in public, we are glowing with each other and we only have recommendation sources. No one really is out there doing the work that is done with TV, that is done with music, that is done with video games, that is done with all the way down the line. And I think whoever this very smart person was said to me, you're not a real industry until you have critics.
Samantha Hodder is doing this with Bingeworthy. She's a Toronto-based creator, and she is trying to invite criticism into the podcast industry. And it's like walking on eggshells, because we're so sort of supportive of each other. But I totally agree with you. And I think that we need to be willing to accept criticism and also be supportive of each other at the same time, right? I think it feels very scary to be criticized because we're also fragile,
Well, we've got rep sweats, which is something I actually learned from a podcast, Code Switch. I usually think about it with screen time. You're afraid to criticize a movie because you don't want to bring it down. I think I have rep sweats about podcasts, and that's why I give glowing recommendations. Sure. Mia, you said that we're afraid. It's like we're not there. Sure. We're not yet there yet, but can we get there if we don't do it?
I think part of it is like without criticism, you also don't push the medium forward. Like we spend a lot of time having like one journalist who was doing all of the anointing of things for a while. And then after a while, I started to like recognize, especially in the last year or two with working with Wait For It, how in a lot of ways that anointing was biased. And for a long time, I thought that was criticism that was happening there. And it turned out it was really just like kind of king making and just like a lot of biased talking. But we don't really get somebody coming. And there was also a show, which I will not name. Lauren, I know you know what this show is. There was also a show that came out in the past year that a lot of us really hated, and no one said anything out loud. I saw people tweeting about it, and I was ready to dive into their DMs saying this show is not only not good, it is harmful to the industry, and people were nervous to speak up and say stuff, including me. I'm not even going to say it now.
Rebecca Lavoie spoke about it.
She did. She's a real one. Rebecca Lavoie is a real one.
But I feel like we're pulling out individual examples of like, but there's one person. But if we're like a real industry, which is exactly like Ronald, you even said the word when you just said that of like, we can't push forward as an industry. And I think criticism is often misunderstood as hatred, or it's misunderstood as like fault instead of adoration. Like so much of criticism is built from a place of love and wanting something to be better and knowing that it has the capacity to be better. And can we have accountability with each other, which is a thing I think we don't have that feels suffused through this whole conversation, to each other, with each other, and how we relate. It feels so intense. And so I just want to restate this question that I think is at the core of all of this, which is, are we an industry? Lauren, what do you think?
I think, once again, it's like, what a question. But yes, I think yes. I think of myself in the industry, and this is how I make my living, but I'm not making the shows, but it's an industry that I think I work in. I think it is.
Ronald, I'm curious about you.
It is an industry. We're new.
Yes.
Like this is like, we're very new and we're very young, and we had some very traumatic things happen within the industry. Like the layoffs alone. Just if you go through layoffs in the last year and then expand that has been really hard for people. Some people left podcasting completely because of that. And these are folks that had been working in public radio for years and then transitioned over to podcasting and then lost their jobs. Like it is a real industry. But because we are so new, and because what is happening, economically with media across disciplines, you know what I mean? Like Hollywood is struggling right now between streaming and putting a movie in theaters and acting and all that. They are struggling. And if Hollywood, which we know is an industry, is struggling, and they've been around for decades, if we know they're struggling, then I don't know why we would think that, us as podcasting, a very young fledgling industry, wouldn't be like prone to some growing pains. And I feel like that's kind of where we are now. The question is, will we grow or will we fade? And if you asked me that, I just don't feel as optimistic that it's going to exist as we know it in the next 20 years. I don't know what version of audio production is going to exist for us.
Yeah. Mia,
I was just going to say, I totally agree with what you say. And about the industry just being so new, to the majority of consumers, podcasting is brand new and just getting started. And I disagree that it's going to fade. I think only because audio as a medium is so old. I think audio as a medium is going to continue, and in some digital form, it's going to continue to grow. What form that takes, I have no idea. But I don't think that audio as an industry is going anywhere.
Yes, I look forward to the day that we listen back to this conversation and laugh our asses off.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. I mean, there's the growing pains part of it is something I really take, in my heart, that like, absolutely this is growing pains. And with any growing pains, like, it hurts. It hurts. And I would like to go back to where we started. And I would like to go back around the horn. And I would like to revisit your answers to that first question and see, after all of this time of talking, how you're feeling. So 1 to 10, 1 being anyone can do it tomorrow with minimal effort. 10 being the most difficult, nearly impossible for anyone. How difficult is it for someone with no pre-existing audience to build one large enough to make a living with podcasting?
Man, when you ask it that way, I would say for me, it's at a firm 8/9.
So you went up.
Because I'm like, to go from nothing to getting a fully sustained audience making a living. I'm not going from nothing. I've gone from something, and I'm still not making a living making weight for it. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm like, I don't know who's doing it having nothing, and they would have to, unless their name is Travis Devontae Kelsey, I don't know who else.
But he has a little bit of something.
That's exactly it. He has an existing audience, so I'm wrong. I'm still wrong again.
Lauren, how about you?
Listen, I wish I could have been monitoring my number throughout, because I kept on thinking, I think I'm going up to a 4. Oh, no, I'm sliding back up and down. I refuse to be a pessimistic. I demand to grasp on my optimism. I'm staying a 3.
Staying a 3. And Mia, you were a 5 last time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing everything Ronald's saying, and I am not trying to make a podcast, right? Like, I have a diverse range of things that I do to try to make ends meet, and it's debatable whether I'm actually making ends meet right now in my current freelance state. But also, I also like to be optimistic. So I'm going to stick with a 5 and say we are in tumultuous times, and it is difficult, but not impossible. I'm going to stay right in the middle. Cop-out answer. Okay.
Can I ask Ronald one more question?
Sure.
So there was Hear Me Out. Their podcast had to end. I could tell they were very upset about this. Their episode was Is Podcasting Dead? And they were supposed to be arguing whether it was dead or not. One person yes, one person no. By the end, they were both, yes, podcasting is dead. Would you say that?
No, I don't think podcasting is dead. I think when I said fade or grow, what I'm saying is, like, the idea of being able to make a living by just having a podcast. Like, you used to be able to go to a radio station as a DJ and make either a full-time or part-time job, like just talking into a microphone. And at one point we thought that there was a bunch of us that thought we were going to be able to do that in podcasting. And I think that iteration is possibly dead. But Lauren, I just want to say, I want to be clear. I'm not pessimistic on the craft of creators of any of that stuff. Yeah. But as the industry, like, it is hard to have faith. Yeah. Like, y'all know what we're dealing with out here. Y'all have had the same meetings I've had.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think we're getting a lot of nods in the meeting here, and I feel like that is a really good sentiment to kind of buoy us all into that positive place that I think we're all looking to be if we possibly can. So I just want to thank Lauren, Mia, Ronald, thank you all for coming on. You were the perfect group of people to help us tease this out and think this through. So thanks for taking the time coming on the show and talking with us about all this.
Thank you.
Thank you. So honored to be here with you all.
Where can folks find you on the internet? Let's start with Mia.
You can find me at freelancecafe.substack.com.
What about you, Lauren?
I think if you go to tinkmedia.co, you can find everything I do.
And Ronald, how about you?
I am on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and X at It's Big Ron. That's at OHITSBIGRON. Instagram is the one I use the most. Please follow me on Instagram. It's Instagram. Thank you.
All right. And we will have links to all that stuff in the show notes.
Hello, Wait For It listeners. I hope you're enjoying the show. And I want to invite you to check out another Oh It's Big Ron Studio show called Leaving the Theater. Leaving the Theater is a television and film review podcast that started with me reviewing movies as I walked out of the theater immediately after seeing them. It's now expanded to include me reviewing television and streaming titles on my couch as well. These are the freshest take on what we just watched, and it's a lot of fun. On each episode, I talk with my movie-loving friends or colleagues from other podcasts, and we rate whatever we watched from 1 to 5 stars. If you're an overthinker like me, you'll enjoy agreeing and disagreeing with my analysis. Again, that's Leaving the Theater, available everywhere you listen to podcasts. This season of Wait For It is brought to you by Big Fig Mattress. Now, I know there are other mattress companies out there, but Big Fig is specifically designed for fat folks. They've made a quality mattress that will last 20 years with a full replacement warranty and a 120-night trial just to make sure it's the right mattress for you. You know, sometimes when I travel, after a few nights of sleeping on those hotel beds, coming home to my Big Fig mattress is a vacation from my vacation. And listeners, you can have that vacation too. Go to the link in our show notes and take the Bed Builder quiz to get exclusive discounts on your new Big Fig.
Radiotopia.